So we'll start chapter 4. Again, this is in a sense, this is the finale of the order of the soul. The next chapter is also about the godly soul, about Torah, about the uniqueness of Torah, but that's like a specific topic in the continuum here. In the simple order of from the etzem haneshama through koiches hanefesh, the attributes of the neshama. So now we're at the third stage of levushe hanefesh, the garments of the neshama. So, as we mentioned in the beginning of this topic, that's in general, that's the order. So this is the finale. Now, this is important to understand why this is the finale. What is this saying here? Levushe hanefesh, as we'll read them here, are very commonly referred to as your speech, your thought, and your action. Maybe we'll explain first. Let's read the first sentence, and then we'll ask. Already in the first sentence, there's a question that Q needs to be aroused, and try to understand the angle here. He says like this: Ve'od, in addition to what we've explained, ve'od, yesh lekol nefesh elokit, every godly soul has shlosha levushim, 3 garments, shehem machshava, dibur, u'maseh, which are the thought, speech, and action, shel taryag mitzvot Torah. The thought, the speech, and action of the Torah, of the mitzvahs of the Torah. Period. Now, here we'll ask the first question. The first question is, what's the pshat that the godly soul has garments, has predetermined garments? Simply, when I think of garments, there's a question. What does it mean that the godly soul has garments and the animal soul has garments? I could picture garments as referring to the body. That I have 2 souls. I have a soul, and when my soul expresses itself in speech, then it garments itself in the garment of speech. And when it expresses itself in thought, it garments itself in the garment of thought. And I could be thinking about Hashem. It could be my godly soul thinking, or I could be thinking about myself, and then it would be my animal soul thinking. But the garment of thought would be the same garment. It's just a question of who's garmenting, who's putting it on. That could be easily the image of levushe hanefesh. And then I'd see the levushim as part of the body. Now, if you look forward in Tanya, then you'll see that there is such an image in chapter 9, I think.
It's about the brain that.
Mm-hmm. Here. So he says in chapter 9, where he describes, and we haven't reached there yet, but the order is that after he describes the godly soul, which we're finishing up now, and then he goes to the animal soul, and then in chapter 9, he describes the person in light of that, in light of that concoction of what he's explaining now. He'll then describe what life looks like. What's the balance of a person's psyche? How the godly soul and animal soul are competing over filling the person's reality, the person's body. The allegory he uses is like 2 kings battling over a small town. That's the allegory he'll use in chapter 9. Now there, he explicitly says that small town has the limbs, like the limbs of my body, and the thought and the speech and the action of the body. So it's there, the idiom is very explicitly that both the godly soul and the animal soul are competing over the same garments, over the same reality. And here he says that the godly soul has its garments, and later on he'll say that the animal soul has its garments. So it's very important to note the difference. Now, if you note the phrasing, you'll see that here he calls it three kochot, the levushei hanefesh, the garments of the soul, are part of the soul itself. When he says, like we say this in Kabbalah, so the levushei hanefesh are in Malchus. They're the lowest attribute of yourself. It's part of who you are. It's part of the soul. It's not part of the body. If we say this in a human idiom, very simply, it's not part of your body. It's part of your soul. So it's like your ability, your trait, your tendency to express yourself. You have three attributes of expression, or you have one attribute of expression, which is Malchus. And it divides into three layers. So you end up with three attributes of this expression, but this is not, I mean, when you say levush, like levush hadibur, the attribute of speech, you're not referring to the action of speech. You're not referring to the words that you pronounce. You're referring to that part of your soul that knows to phrase itself, knows how to phrase itself. That you can narrate your personality. What's all of your personality? You can narrate your intellectual attributes. You can narrate your emotional experience. Your ability, your trait of narrating yourself. That's your attribute of speech. When he, in Perek Tet, if you want to skip forward, in chapter and page 28, when he discusses the combat over the body, there he says,
Page 28? No.
yeah, 28, end of chapter 9.
End of chapter 9. So I have a different. End of chapter 9 is, oh, right. You're right. Page 28. Okay.
So there he calls he uses two different phrases. He says that there's koach hadibur. Koach hadibur here is the ability of speech. Koach is like ability. And he says that the godly soul wants its garment of speech to conquer all of the ability of speech of a person's reality, of the person's body. So the two phrases he uses here, we'll read it from inside, are koach velevush.
How many lines down? Where in the
6, 7 lines down. Right? He says, "V'kol koach hadibur shebapeh." So that's the ability of speech which is in your mouth. That's part of the body. It's part of your reality. It's not part of any soul. So it's neutral. It's like the playground. And both your godly soul and your animal soul are competing over your ability of speech. So when I'm speaking now, that's my ability of speech, and it's either led and it's either, I mean, the phrase is a chariot. What's riding on my ability of speech? Is it a chariot for the garment of speech of my animal soul, or the garment of speech of my godly soul? And that's what they're competing. So if we're learning Torah now, then Bezrat Hashem, I hope that our Torah is a little bit b'kedusha, and then what we're saying is a chariot to the attribute of speech. So this, like the technical speech that you get, like the content, the soul, that part of myself, which is expressed, which is riding on the letters, on the physical phrasing, that's my godly soul. It's part of myself, of my godly self. So the levushei hanefesh is the ability to narrate. Like I have an idea now in Torah, in Chassidus, and it's an intellectual understanding, and maybe I also have an emotional rise, like a reaction from that understanding of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And my ability to express that, to narrate it in words, That's the garment of speech of my godly soul. But the words you're hearing, that's the ability of speech of the body. And the garment of speech wants to conquer the ability of speech. So that's the phrase here. וכל כוח הדיבור שבפה והמחשבה שבמוח יהיו ממולאים מן לבושי המחשבה והדיבור. So the
Rabbi,
abilities
can I
will be
ask
filled.
something?
Yeah.
You said if the speech is coming from the godly soul, but then the ears that hear are from the animal soul. Is that what you said?
The ability, no,
Okay.
the speech itself, again, if I'm speaking right now, so what is speech? What am I saying? So there's first of all, there's content here, right? That content, like the concept I'm conveying now in speech, I'm giving a class. So the content is an expression of myself. The attribute, the ability to do that, to phrase my experience of self outwards, that's part of my soul. It's part of who I am. Part of who I am is the ability. It's called malchus. That's levush hanefesh. That's called having a garment to my soul. So the garments of the soul are the soul's ability to get dressed. It's not a separate garment. It's not like a shirt that I put on. It's my ability to clothe myself. It's part of who I am. If right now I'm expressing my intellect, right? I'm expressing an intellectual concept. So the concept within myself is an understanding. It's my bina. It's in my Chabad. The concept I'm expressing now is something that exists in my Chabad. So there, it's part of myself. My ability to phrase it outwards to you, that's called the garment of my soul. That's also part of myself. It's all something that exists within myself. Now, what you're hearing, like the physical sounds, those are like horses. It's like, that's a shirt that I put on. That's something other than myself, which I ride on. If I ride on the physical letters, just like I'm using Zoom, I'm using my lips as well. So my lips and even the physical sounds I'm producing, those are not the garment of my soul. Those aren't my soul itself. That's called the ability of speech. And it's, if we want to be very technical about it, it's referring to my body, not to my soul. It's part of my reality. So now I think simply when a person says speech, what he means is the technical speech. Like if you say someone is ilem, right? He's mute. He has he can't speak. So not necessarily do you mean that he lacks the ability to express himself. It could very well be that he has a lot to say. He has a lot of intellectual, very intricate phrasings of his self. He lacks the technical talent of chiseling words that can be chariots, that can convey his expression. Now I don't know, maybe he has a psychological problem of lack of ability to express himself. Like some people are more talented in expressing themselves, and some people are less talented in expressing themselves. So that could definitely be part of the soul. But it could very well be that a person just lacks the technical bodily function of actualizing his expression of self. And usually when you say speech today, what you're referring to is the ability of speech, which is the bodily function. But when you say that the soul has a garment of speech, you're not referring to the ability of speech. You're referring to the psychological, the spiritual attribute of expression. So what the godly soul has three garments means that it knows, it expresses itself, it phrases itself, it knows how to narrate itself in thought, speech, and action. All three of these things are not thoughts words or deeds. Is that understood?
Yeah.
So in chapter 9, when he'll discuss the reality of a person, then he'll say that both souls are combating a set of garments, but those garments are the body. So again, both the relation the phrase or the idiom of garments can be used in two different levels. Within the soul itself, there's the garments of the soul. That's the malchus, the ability of expression of self. That's a garment relatively to the higher attributes of the soul, because it's expressing, like your clothes are an expression of yourself. So here the idiom garment is referring to what your clothing expresses you or enables you to expose yourself. You can walk outside, you can step out of yourself when you wear clothes. Or the same idea of garments could also be referring to your body, to your ability of speech. And then the idiom of garments is referring to something that's other than yourself. It's something foreign to you that you put on yourself, that you use, you ride on your shoes, you ride on your pants, and you ride on your shirt. So in Tanya, when he says the garments of the soul, he's referring to part of the soul. It's very important to understand the technical meaning of what we're saying. Very often this is misunderstood. So
Why is it important? Why is this an important distinction?
just because you won't understand what he's saying if you don't make this distinction.
Okay.
There's what the soul has garments, and then there's the actual speech and thought. That's something else. So in one place he'll say that each soul has different garments. Also here, I'll ask the question I wanted to ask initially. This is a little bit more in depth. What we said until now was a little bit technical. All of that being said, what does it mean that the soul, here he says that the godly soul has 613 garments, right? Its garments are the mitzvahs of the Torah. Now, what does that mean that the godly soul has garments? I mean, if I were to try and contemplate this within myself, then the logical order is seemingly upside down. What is it? It's not that a soul has garments. A soul has an ability to express itself. And whatever way it expresses itself, that becomes its garments. Like if I'd ask about my animal soul, which thoughts can I think? Think whatever I want. Whatever I want will become an expression of myself. So seemingly, the thoughts that I think aren't predetermined. First I have an experience, and when I think about it, then that thought becomes the animal soul's thought. How many thoughts can I think? I don't know. There's an infinite variety of thoughts I can think, or of words that I can say, and of actions that I can do. But when he speaks about the godly soul's thought, speech, and action, then he says something that needs to be understood. He says that the godly soul has, as if predetermined garments. He doesn't say that whatever, we're running a little bit through the chapters here, but if you skip to chapter 6, on page 20, one page back. There he says the reasonable way of seeing things, exactly what I said just now. When he's talking about the animal soul's garments, then he says that anything the animal soul says, whatever, he doesn't say that the animal soul has X garments. This is what the animal soul knows how to think and how to say and how to do. No, he says the animal soul knows how to think, say, and do. And anything it thinks, says, or does is a garment of the animal soul. So there's no predetermined content. We'll read it inside.
Where? Chapter on page 20? Chapter 6 or chapter 4?
Chapter 6, but
Okay.
the beginning of chapter 6, page 19, the bottom line.
Okay.
The bottom line of page 19.
Okay.
So there he says, Esa b'chinot elu atmeot. He explained, we're not going to get into it now, it's not the topic. He explains the 10 sefirot of the animal soul, the 10 attributes of the animal soul. And then he says, these 10 attributes of the animal soul, unholy, unpure attributes of the animal soul, when a person thinks about them, or speaks them, or acts upon them, הרי מחשבתו שבמוחו ודיבורו שבפיו וכוח המעשים שבידיו ושאר איבריו נקראים לבושי מסבו. So whenever you think, you express yourself, your ego, your yeshus, in thought, or in speech, or in action, so those thoughts, speech, and actions become a garment to your animal soul. It doesn't say that the animal soul has 613 garments in which it can garment itself. And in the godly soul, what we just read in the beginning of chapter 4, you can go back to where we are now, there he says that each godly soul has 3 garments, which are, what are those 3 garments? They are the thought, speech, and action of the Torah, of the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah. So this needs to be understood. What is it? Why does he refer to the godly soul's garments as something predetermined? Not whatever you say coming from your godly soul is a garment of your godly soul, which was, again, that would be the reasonable way of thinking about it. Like my animal soul. In my animal soul, whatever any way I express myself would be an expression of myself. It's not that I can express myself in certain ways and then I'm expressing my animal soul. No. When I'm expressing my animal soul, any way I do it has no difference. That will all be a garment of myself. Which is, again, that's like the logical way of saying it. But in the godly soul, he doesn't say that. Now, why? Is the difference here understood, what I'm pointing out?
I ask a question. So,
Who wants to go first?
true that there are garments of both the animal soul and the divine soul, that
No.
both have garments,
No.
and the garments of the divine soul are the 613 mitzvahs,
That's what he says.
and that garments of the animal soul are the self, the ego, the yeshut.
Nachon, but he doesn't say,
As
again,
the 613 mitzvahs.
no, again, the godly soul has like a predetermined options of how to express itself. It only expresses itself in 613 ways. About the animal soul, he says it's the expression of your ego. But what is that expression of your ego? Whatever you express, that's the expression of your ego. It's not kidu, which again, that's a much more logical way of thinking of things. If I ask you, how can you express yourself? You can express yourself in infinite ways. There's no limit to how you express yourself. You have three areas of expression. You can express yourself in thought, in speech, or in action, but there's an infinite variety of thoughts, speeches, or actions which you can do. There's no predetermined thought, speech, and action. It's not that you have 613 or any other number of predetermined expressions. Whatever you express, whatever you choose, in any which way you choose to express, to bring your ego into actualization, that would be the garment of your animal soul, right? But about the godly soul, he doesn't say that. It's not that anything the godly soul does is the garment of the godly soul. No. There are X garments which the godly soul can do. That's what it can do. And that's, you need to understand the logic of why he phrases the godly soul that way and the animal soul the other way. I just mentioned, I think that for me, the more reasonable way of viewing things is how he describes the animal soul. That my expression of self is flexible. Whatever I express, that becomes the expression of self. I do something, and therefore that action is expressing me. It's not that there's some action which I decide to do. I decide to do, and that becomes my expression. So the way he phrases the godly soul is strange. That's what we need to explain.
Okay,
Yeah.
question. Well, the use of the word predetermined, It's because if someone is expressing an idea in Torah, it seems there's infinite ways that different people could express that idea. I don't feel like predetermined is the right word. It seems like this
Okay,
infinite expression.
okay, but you could say that a person can put on tefillin in very many ways. But I'll ask you differently. Can a person express his godly soul without putting on tefillin? I wanna express my godly soul by jumping on one leg. Right? There are people who they hold the Guinness World Records for jumping on one leg. This is how they express their selves. Right? They are the world champions they have a diploma on their wall. They are the world champions of skipping on one leg. So this is how they choose to express themselves. It's not that there's a certain amount of ways you can do it, right? People, if you go into the Guinness Book of Records, you'll probably see very strange things. I haven't done it for a while, but you can check, and I'm sure you'll see all sorts of ludicrous ideas that people had how to express themselves, how to actualize their self. Now, it's not that they chose from a variety. No, they created. They imagined within themselves, and whatever they did became their expression of self. Even if you say that within the 613 mitzvahs, there is a relative variety within that finite amount, which is true, still the logic of how your soul pours into its garments needs to be understood, because the simple logic says is that the soul creates its garments, and therefore the garments could be anything the soul creates. But here he's not saying that. He's saying that the soul has garments, and it needs to choose which garments that would be like saying that you need to open the Guinness Book of Records and decide which record you want to make yours. That's not how it works. So about the godly soul, he does it again. The psychological logic of the relativity between garments and soul imply that your soul determines your garments, not the other way around. Later on in the chapter, as we'll see, in the bottom of chapter 4, he says explicitly that in the godly soul, the garments they stem from a higher root than the soul itself. So again, that's why they're predetermined, in a sense. Again, we'll have to explain this in a minute. But I just want to note the difference. In the animal soul, it's very clear that the animal soul creates its garments. And therefore, anything it creates will be its garments. Whatever I do, those are my actions. Whatever I think, those are my thoughts. In the godly soul, there are X thoughts which I can think. Maybe I can think them in a variety of ways, but there are still X thoughts that I can think.
But I still feel like this infinite thoughts of Torah, ways to express Torah. It seems infinite to me, how each person could explain something or understand something. Predetermined doesn't
I decide that smoking on Shabbos is Torah.
I mean real Torah. I mean real Torah.
Okay, but saying real Torah is saying that it's predetermined. It's not that whatever I decide to think becomes Torah. There is a Torah, and I think it. If a person makes up a theory, not a Torah, so it's not that there's a theory which he pours himself into. He pours himself out. That's his theory. So the theory is a result of the soul. But if you say that you learn Torah and that's your garments, that's your expression of self, so then Torah isn't an expression of yourself at all. It's something that you pour yourself into. It's not something that pours out of you. Is that, you understand what I'm saying?
Maybe.
This is a very important point to understand here. I guess so much so, we'll get to this in a second, but try to think about just your animal soul, how you view your garments. So all your thoughts, your deeds, and your actions, they don't exist. You exist them. You create them by thinking them and doing them. That's not what he says about the godly soul. He doesn't say that you created the mitzvahs by deciding to do them. That the godly soul creates its mitzvahs. Whatever it does becomes a mitzvah. No, it says there are mitzvahs, and those are the only things it can do. It's very strange. Seeing garments that way. So maybe I'll answer the question, and then maybe that will help to understand the difference here.
Can I
First of
ask
all, this is
a
what's
question?
that? Yeah.
So, Nagid, like something happens during the day, and my Yetzer Hara jumps in and goes to town. And then I see a friend and I make a conscious decision to be dan l'kav zchut, which is a mitzvah,
Okay.
or a derivative of a mitzvah. I had a struggle, and I worked, and I was dan l'kav zchut. So is that an expression of speech of my divine soul, or not?
Definitely, but
So that's a
but
predetermined.
notice the difference. That when you said you went to town or did something from your animal soul, then you didn't pick and choose an option of how to express yourself. Whatever you did would be your expression of self. But when you wanted to say you did your divine soul, then you had to choose out of a variety of 613 options.
Okay, right.
Now, why is that the case? Why can your animal soul express itself any way it wants, and that becomes its expression of self? And your godly soul doesn't just express itself and that becomes a mitzvah. There are mitzvahs, and it only knows how to express itself that way. Why is that the case? The logic says that the soul's attributes cause the garments. That's a simple logic. And the garments are the result of the attribute. I love someone. Because I love him, I express myself in a loving way. I say speech, words of love. I do loving deeds. I think loving thoughts. So the love determines the garment.
This is the animal soul, you're saying.
It's the animal soul, but it's also just the logical way of looking at things. That I have an internal experience, and that internal experience drives my exterior. That's the logical way of seeing things. But in the godly soul, he doesn't say that. He doesn't say that you love Hashem, and anything you do from there is an expression of that love. No, he says you love Hashem, and the only way you can express it is by putting on tefillin. So that's very strange. It's different than your animal soul. Now, why is that the case? So we'll try to answer the question. Again, it's not really different. We want to explain that really the logic is the same logic, but you need to note the difference of how we're discussing the animal soul and how we're discussing the godly soul. What do you mean when you say a godly soul? What do you mean when you say an animal soul? This is, again, all in continuation of how we've been explaining all the chapters up until now. That the Nakuda we said we'd focus on in the study here is how the godly soul is an expression of Hashem. It's not part of yourself, it's an expression of Hashem. And if you recall, in chapter 3, then we described how the attributes of the godly soul, the emotion and the intellect of the godly soul, are all experiencing Hashem's love, Hashem's understanding, penetrating myself. That's how we discussed it in chapter 3. Now, so my soul, if you would, my godly soul is it's not its own root. My godly soul is like a middleman. What's the root of my godly soul? What's the etzem of my godly soul? So the etzem of my godly soul is God. Very simple. It's part of Hashem, like we said. What does it mean that I have a godly soul? It means that the part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu penetrates me. So it's like, maybe we could allegorize it. It's like there's a spring, a wellspring, and then there's a river, and the river flows through me, but I'm not the spring itself. And the godly soul is God, it's part of Hashem. And why do you call it a soul? Because it penetrates a person. And then it becomes his soul, it becomes his vitality. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants something. My experience of my godly soul is like the flow of Hashem's will. It flows through me. So I find myself driven. Let's say an example. Let's say the Rebbe wants something. So now I'm very connected to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe talks to me and he empowers me by his will. He wants something very strongly. And his will drives me. I find myself driven by his will. The stronger he wants it, the stronger my drive. Even though it's not something that I want. My ego doesn't care so much about these things. But the Rebbe cares, and I have a connection to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe's will penetrates me and drives me. So we could say that part of the Rebbe's personality that penetrates me becomes like a soul to me. It becomes what drives my body. It's like a soul appearing in my body, a second soul, third soul. It's not myself. It's not coming from me. It's coming from the Rebbe, from the Tzaddik, but it's driving through me and it's carrying me away, like a river carrying you with it. So it penetrates me and drives me. I could find my feet moving, my thoughts running, fills my thoughts. The Rebbe's will fills my thoughts, fills my speech. I talk about it. Right? A person went to the Rebbe, sat in a Farbrengen, and he can't stop talking about it. He can't stop thinking about it. What the Rebbe cared about, right? The Rebbe spoke about Shleimus Haaretz, and he spoke so strongly that a person came out of the Farbrengen completely filled with the Rebbe's caring. The Rebbe cared so much that his caring drove right through me like a ton of bricks. And now my entire self is driven by the Rebbe's will. And also my garments. I find myself thinking about it all day, speaking about it all day, and doing things. I'm moving around, moving my hands and my feet. So that's like an example of what a godly soul is. It's what a Kadosh Baruch who penetrates me and drives me. So if my godly soul is exposed, so I find myself valuing and being driven by Hashem's will. It's not my will; it's Hashem's will. So the essence. If I take these three layers of the soul, I'd say that etzem haneshama, the essence of the soul, it's not in me at all. It's Hashem. And then there's like a ray from the essence of the soul that penetrates me and drives me into my garments. That's called makif and pnimi. That there's a part of the soul which is chaya yechida. The higher parts of the soul which are connected, yechida liachdach, chavuka udvuka b'achda. The essence of the soul is within Hashem. And the part of the soul that penetrates the body, that's called the naran, nefesh, ruach, neshama. The three lower layers of the soul penetrate the body. Now, if that's the case, then I experience the will as something already defined. I don't determine. I'm being carried away by a flow that's already going in a certain direction. If the Rebbe wanted Shleimus Haaretz, that's what he spoke about. That's where he drove. Then I'll only ever find myself driven in that direction. I'll never find myself driven in a different direction because that's where the drive is going. So if what's appearing within me is really the Rebbe's drive, it's not me, it's not coming from myself, it's not stemming from my own sense of self, it's stemming from the Rebbe's will, so it will only ever appear in the same inertia of where the Rebbe was willing, where the Rebbe was going. Because your godly soul is, again, it's a flow penetrating you from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So so the penetrating part has a predetermined inertia. And the Kadosh Baruch Hu only wanted 613 things. So you'll never find yourself driven in any other direction, because that's where Hashem's going. And all your godly soul is a continuum of that drive. That's what your godly soul is. That's what we've been explaining in all these chapters. The animal soul is not like that. The animal soul is essentially you. You are your animal soul. So you produce the drive. Whatever you want, that becomes the drive. Then you intellectualize about it, you experience it, and you actualize it. So it's not a flow penetrating you, it's you yourself. We could say this in a strange way. We could say that if you look at these differences from a Kadosh Baruch Hu's angle, so the animal soul reflects Hashem more than the godly soul. The animal soul is similar to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he doesn't have 613 mitzvahs which he can want. No, he really can want whatever he wants. And whatever he wants will become a mitzvah. Right? In the essence, Hashem could want anything. He could express himself in any way he wants, just like your animal soul. And whatever he wants will become his will. So if he decides to want pink stockings, so that will be a mitzvah. That will become a mitzvah. He happened to want black boxes, but he could want pink socks, right? He could want whatever he wasn't predetermined by it. Just like my animal soul. My animal soul, my experience of myself, whatever I want becomes my will. Well, I can choose to want X, and then that becomes my will. Same thing in Kadosh Baruch Hu. Kadosh Baruch Hu didn't come around and find 613 mitzvahs. No, he, for no reason whatsoever, just because of his free will, chose to express himself in 613 ways. But that's not my godly soul. My godly soul is the inertia penetrating myself from a Kadosh Baruch Hu. So if I look at the godliness from Hashem's point of view, then mitzvahs are not predetermined. They're just Hashem's free will. But if I look at it from my soul's point of view, which is like the middle process here, the middle stage, when Hashem has already wanted something, and he wanted it so strongly that his will penetrated a person, and that penetration is called the soul. So the penetrating part, the soul, already has an inertia. It's going somewhere. It already wants something, or it's a will for something. Hashem wanted 613 mitzvahs. And you'll only ever find yourself driven that way. The Rebbe could have chosen any 10 campaigns. He didn't have to go for Mitzvah Tefillin. But as a chassid, if I find myself driven by the Rebbe, then I'll only be driven where he's actually going. So my drive is predetermined, as if. It's not really predetermined. It's the Rebbe's choice. But I find myself driven. The godly soul is what you find yourself driven, where Hashem, in his free will, chose to go. But because the part of the soul which is conscious is only the lower layers of the soul, not where they're connected to the essence, therefore those layers are the drive itself, and they're seemingly predetermined. They're only going where they're going.
Okay.
So in a sense, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is more similar to your animal soul than to your godly soul. Because your animal soul is like, that's why Bemet, your animal soul, your narcissism is like a godly, it's like turning yourself into a god. It's like saying that whatever you do becomes holy. Whatever I do, that becomes me. It's like I can do whatever I want, it makes no difference. Right? It's valuable because it's mine. It's not mine because it's valuable. That's how your animal soul feels, right?
The Rebbe spoke about finding Hashem in the ego itself. It seems like that's...
Very often in Chassidus, you'll see that the deepest concepts in Kabbalah, like maybe one of the most famous examples about Paro. The Zohar says that Paro is the he is the mirror image of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's essence. That's mamish of Atzmus. Like a radical thing to say. Why? Because also Paro is like he doesn't. I don't need anybody. I don't need anything. I'm completely independent, like a Kadosh Baruch Hu, But the godly soul, because it's rectified, is much more normal, much more gentle. It's just like a middleman. So that again, a very important point to note here in the difference of how he phrases the godly soul's garments. That the godly soul has 613 garments, and those garments are higher than the soul. And in the end of the page, you'll see that he explicitly says that the garments are higher than the part of the soul that's in the body, not higher than the essence of the soul, higher than the naran, than the nefesh ruach neshama. Because again, higher than than what we'd call the soul, like a part of your godly soul which is in you. Where your yichida, that's Hashem mamish. That's how your soul is rooted in a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Their mitzvahs are whatever Hashem decides to do. So it's obvious, I mean, anybody understands that mitzvahs towards a Kadosh Baruch Hu aren't predetermined. You didn't come around and find tefillin. Tefillin are valuable because Hashem decided to value them. That's what makes them valuable. But to me, I experience the already driven inertia. That's called my soul. So I find myself, if I connect, if I experience my godly soul, I will find myself driven in one of the 613 directions which Hashem is driving to. That's where he's going, in his free will. That's what it says here in the beginning. Was that understood?
Yes, we hope so. Yes.
Question? You have a question, Yafa?
One second.
Yeah.
So I think if I understood, I wouldn't ask the question, but I'm going to ask the question in order to clarify. So if it is an expression of the godly soul, those phrases that you said a couple of times of, I find myself driven, I'm driven and I find myself whatever, that's the only way that the godly soul expresses itself. It's not like a casual, more la-di-da kind of.
Again, it's casual to Hashem. Like if you think of a Kodesh Baruch Hu's point of view, then it is casual. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he doesn't have to express himself in tefillin. But once that's what he wants, then if I think of how much I treasure Hashem's will, then I will automatically find myself wanting tefillin. For me, it is predetermined. Hashem, it was casual. That was a good word. He just decided tefillin. He could have decided anything.
It's just such an awesome qualification that I find myself, I don't know, I find a very powerful qualification and that I'm driven.
So if a person would say that his godly soul wants to express itself by jumping on one foot, it's just not true. Because what your godly soul is the inertia of what Hashem wants. And Hashem, he could want jump. If Hashem would come to Mount Sinai and say, please, all of you jump on one foot, then if you really care about Hashem, then you'll find yourself wanting to jump on one foot. That's true. But the will, as far as you're concerned, is always something predetermined because it's a drive not from yourself. And if you find yourself driven to something other than the Torah and mitzvahs, which Hashem actually wants, then the drive isn't your godly soul. It's very simple.
Mm-hmm.
That's
but
not
it
what's
still
driving.
Could be a drive.
What's that?
It could still be a drive.
Yeah, your animal soul. It's your animal soul.
So there are drives from the animal soul.
Definitely. There are many drives from the animal soul.
Right,
the animal soul really just chooses whatever it wants, and whatever it wants becomes very valuable. Why is my car so important to me? If I see somebody dent my car, then that's very bad. If you dent your car, I don't care. Why? Because so it's not that my car is more valuable and therefore I treasure it. I treasure it, therefore it becomes valuable. So I create the value. My godly soul is not that way. I don't value tefillin. Hashem values tefillin. That's what makes them valuable. And if I experience HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then I'll only ever find myself valuing what he values. So Hashem doesn't value my car. And if I find myself worshiping my car, that's not my godly soul. That's not an inertia driven from Hashem, because that's not what Hashem said that he wants. It's not, it could have been, Hashem could have wanted cars, but what he actually wanted was 613 things. And that's where it's going. So if I'm connecting to that flow, then it's flowing in a certain direction. Yeah, so that's why when he talks about the godly soul's garments, he says that every soul has 613 garments. Because what the soul is the inertia of a HaKadosh Baruch Hu's will. And this is what Hashem wants. Hashem could have wanted anything, but this is what he actually wanted. And when I find myself wanting, being driven, just like that example by the Rebbe. If I'm driven by the Rebbe, so I'll only ever be driven in the direction that the Rebbe is driving. I'll never find myself driven by the Rebbe to a different direction. If he's not driving there, then there's no drive to be taken by. So only what the Rebbe wants can drive me if what's driving me is the Rebbe. I could drive in the opposite direction. I could want other things. But if I come to the Farbrengen and the Rebbe's enthusiasm carries me away, then it will only carry me away to where the Rebbe is enthusiastic about. It won't take me where the Rebbe is not enthusiastic about. So the Rebbe had free will. He chose what to want. But I find myself as if predetermined. And I can only be carried away in that direction which the Rebbe already wants. So really the godly soul and the animal soul are the same. But if you wanna collaborate them, then you have to say that the animal soul is similar to the godly soul within God, in its root, in the essence of the godly soul. There, really, Hashem can choose whatever he wants, and whatever he wants becomes your drive, becomes valuable, just like the animal soul. But if I talk about the godly soul, which is in my body, my godly soul, the way it penetrates me, so I'm actually catching the middle stage, which is relatively the inertia of a predetermined will. The will doesn't happen within me, it happens within Hashem. The mitzvahs are what Hashem wanted, and my soul is just the experience of his will. So it's going in a certain direction.
So there's a lot of bitul there.
Yeah, nachon. This is, again, that's where all the word bitul comes from. Nachon. But again, even if we take this in the simplest context, like the story you said before. So you went to town, and then you wanted to think about a mitzvah to do, right? So you didn't think, what will I do? Your mind automatically thought, what is one of the things Hashem wants? So you heard a class or something, and you associated with limud zchut, right? Ladun lekaf zchut. But what you were looking for was a will. You weren't looking for what do you want. You weren't creating a will. You were looking for what does Hashem want. And you found yourself thinking of something that he already wanted. So for you, the will was predetermined. So that you value limud zchus is because Hashem chose limud zchus. You didn't choose limud zchus. Hashem valued it, and because you're connected to Hashem, you find yourself valuing it. That's called bittul.